Hey everybody, want to do a quick video on the automotive, industry, give you an overview of it and just a little bit of background on it. Um, just to give a little insight, if you haven't already seen my video on an introduction, I have been in the automotive field for over 40 years. I started off as an automotive tech, and then later on I did some heavy duty equipment, which would be your diesels and stuff like that. And then I was asked to help with some teaching at Cerritos College. I started back in '89 on that. So uh, I've had it quite a few years in the automotive industry. I've seen it grow, I've seen it change over the years versus the way it started off. And I think it's actually changed to the better. But let's go ahead and get into my PowerPoint on the actual background in the automotive industry and give you a little overview on it. So let me go ahead and share this slide here with you. I'm going to make sure I got all the bells and buttons open on us here. So we uh, we actually the industry started, like I said before, many years ago, uh, and I really think if you had seen the way it was back when. I'm not saying that I've seen everything develop from the very beginning, but I've actually seen some changes along the way. I am a third generation mechanic, so my grandfather actually was one of the first people to do automatic transmissions in California. So that was his big claim to fame. And then my dad worked for my grandfather and also a few dealerships. And I came into it when my grandfather had a shop in Downey. If you ever go by a place called Glenn's Automotive, that was actually my grandfather's shop before he retired. So I actually started off, like at 13, cleaning cars, and really, I would say uh, it was a real good, you know, introduction to the automotive field. I got to see things. I got to do just minor tasks, and it really helped me uh, appreciate the industry and grow with the industry. So let's go ahead and get started here. So this is one of the very first, uh, introductions to, going from what they used to call horseless carriages. So before you think about it, covered wagons and all stuff. You've probably seen all the movies. No, I didn't work on covered wagons and stuff like that. I actually came into it, the industry, back in the 70s. That's 1970s. Uh, and it was really still into points and condensers, and we'll talk more about that when we get in the ignition section of the class. And I got to see things evolve. There was no such thing as a computer in cars. Now we have multiple computers in cars nowadays. So this is one of the first, and it was. We started off in the automotive industry as a battery electric vehicle. Went from horses carriages to battery electric, and it wasn't until later on we went into combustion engines. It seems like it's going full circle now. Now we're getting back into battery electric vehicles, in which I'll try to touch on later in the semester. And before we even had metals that were more prominent, actually they were built out of wood. They were, not very much was actually metal. There was some, but not as much as you would think. So they were, again, considered horseless carriages, and most of the bodies were just constructed of wood. That was what was available and more, able to get a hold of it. So they started building them out of wood, and then they went into metal chassis. So this is a actual 1950 era type vehicle, and it shows that here we have a metal frame, and these would be your solid frame. So we'll talk about a little more on that as we go along here too. So you can actually see the engine inside here, and then we have the metal suspension systems that attach to it with the frame, and also in the very back there you actually see a differential. And as we go along in the semester, we'll get more into that too. So, we had the brakes, we had the suspension system, and then we also had the wheels and tires to support all of it too. And one of the things I want you to kind of understand is some of the terms and it's all in your reading too. I'm not saying this should be the only thing you do. I want you to actually read the material that I put up there too, and this hopefully will enhance your education, because I want you to do well. I want you to succeed. If you're not getting in the automotive industry, you'll have a better knowledge of how, all the different pieces to the car, and we'll go through all the different systems as we go along. So I want you to be able to even talk to your mechanic, and maybe you're going to have somebody else work on your car, or maybe you just want to do a little bit of work on your car too. So this program I'm putting together is going to hopefully enhance your owning an automobile. So anyways, back to it. These are the different pillars, as we call it, and there's different sections of the car, and we'll call them like A pillar, B pillar, and it, the rear door, passenger side, driver side, like that too. Here I actually have a full frame vehicle. Now more and more we're into what they call unibody. So you see the whole frame right here. This is whole frame that's actually solid all the way to the back. You really don't see much of this anymore except for trucks. And when it comes to cars, there's actually they're built out of unibody because they know individual sections can crumple. So if you're in a accident, you'd probably be better off being in a unibody system, because they can crumple up and absorb some of the energy. Whereas if you're in a solid frame, that's just like a hit and your body takes the full effect. So in the vehicles that crumple, I don't want you to think that, hey, they'll crumple down to I'm just totally crushed. It actually has a similar kind of a roll cage around it to keep it from going too far, but it will absorb some of the energy so your body doesn't have to take that effect. This is just showing you some of the ribbing of this, the actual wells that there is in place. So on the body, if you were to take all your seats out, you can actually see some of these different pieces are put together, and they're actually ribbed or welded together. Here's an early Corvette, just really for class projects that was in one of the schools. And actually, this is at a museum now. We used to, have this kind of stuff at schools too. More so nowadays, it's you can still buy the little clips, as I call them, but you can actually have the frame off. I've taken a few of our cars in the class and taken pieces off it so I can show more of the vehicle. But this is just one of them that's actually in a museum in actually Kentucky here. So it's kind of cool, to look in there and see things. We do have some of our heavy duty trucks out there with just the frame on it and the cab. It doesn't have everything to it because it makes it kind of neat to inspect it that way too. All right, so one of the labels, if you're buying a car, this is what they call, I should say, the purchase, price. It gives you the how much it costs and what's involved in it, how many miles per gallon. Now that we have electric and hybrid vehicles, it's going to give you an approximate, and this is still an approximate. You see here around town, 24 miles a gallon. Now, if you're Mario Andretti and you just race around all the time, you're not going to get that 24 miles a gallon. You might even get more if you're a Lightfoot, as I call them. And Then on the highway, they get, it says it gets about 34 miles a gallon. Now, this is, again, driving habits play a big role in how well your car is maintained, is actually gets the gas mileage, and also it really tells you a lot on how often you have to maintain it too. If you're doing a lot of short driving around town, probably not going to get that miles per gallon, or MPG, as a lot of times they call it, and you're probably going to have to maintain it a little more often, especially if you're just taking the car out to the 7-Eleven and getting a cup of coffee and then coming back, and you're driving less than a mile in that process. This is, again, this is going to be something that's going to play key on your maintenance, and also on your actually miles per gallon. So yeah, we'll talk more about oil and coolant and stuff as we go along. Now, early on, engines were very, very, very heavy. They actually had mainly in cast steels and stuff like this. This is right here. What you see in front of you is an actually flathead Ford. And if you really want to make really good friends with the tool guy, just go up to Art in the tool shack and say, "Hey, I hear you're at the flathead expert." Actually, this is old, heavy technology. I have a friend at another college. He actually races flatheads out at the Salt Flats, and he's a really flathead kind of guy. He really, everything has to be flathead. Has to have a carburetor on it. I think they finally fuel injected one a while back, but you can see it's not your normal type of engine. Engines nowadays are a lot of them, and they're actually aluminum, and a lot of the pieces. I don't want to say most of them, but we actually try to lighten them up, because weight actually is part of when you start calculating miles per gallon. Your weight of the vehicle is really key on how much miles per gallon you're going to get, and we've really gone away from, and unless you get an older car in the 70s, or pre-72, then you will not have carburetors. You'll have more to be fuel injected, and we'll talk more about that as we go along. So the engines are internal combustion engine. The ones that we really are going to be talking about a lot is about gasoline, but I'll get into a little bit of the diesel engines too, because we have light duty diesels. Now, these are what they call spark ignition engines. When I talk about diesel engines, I'll talk more about the combustion ignition systems too, compression combustion engines. And then they're in different types. More I see the 4 cylinders or 5 cylinders. They do have like straight 4s, straight 5s, straight 6s. I'll elaborate more on this when we get into the engine section. And then there's the V types, so it'll be like the V6s, the V8s, the V10s, V12s, V16s. So these are, I'll talk more about the different types of the way they're put together and how we identify them. And then we also go by the valve arrangement. What you see in the flathead here, believe it or not, the valves are in the block and they're not on the cylinder heads. So this is early on. Now we have our valves in the cylinder heads themselves. So this cover here is more so a cover, not a really, it's considered a cylinder head, but it's more of a cover than it really is a cylinder head, you might say. Now, there's different systems in a car, and we talk about this different systems, and we have what they call a cooling system. This is where we cool the engine down. We actually use some of the engine heat for a heater core. I'll get more into this as we go along. But if you allow the engine to just continue to get hotter and hotter and hotter, then it will actually cause fatigue, engine failure. So this is just showing a diagram of that. Now on top of that, and this is kind of your maintenance items, uh, is the cooling, the lubrication system. The lubrication system, which will cover, actually pulls, lubricant from an oil pan, and it actually helps lubricate the parts. If you do metal on metal, which I'll cover a little more, it builds up friction and heat. And when it does that, then we're going to have problems with fatigue again. And it's going to cause wearing, and then you're going to have engine failure. So you got two things: the cooling system to keep it from overheating, and you've also got the lubrication system. But believe it or not, part of the job the lubrication set does is helps cool the engine also. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. The other thing is, how do we get the air in? And we'll talk about how the engine takes that air and the fuel and makes those kabooms going inside. I say kabooms, these little minor explosions to move the pistons up and down to produce power for the wheels to actually turn. And we take, it draws the air in, but we also have to start thinking about making sure that air is clean, because if we don't have a clean air coming in, that little bit of sand and dirt actually acts as a little piece of sandpaper on the cylinder wall. So there again, we have more wear. Uh, there's approximately 9,000 gallons of air needed for every gallon of fuel. So you can see there's a balance going on right there. And then the air is drawn into the engine from the place where water cannot enter. So we'll talk more the configuration of the engine. If we have water in there, we can actually have electrostatic lockup, and it can cause your engine to not even turn over. So there's all kinds of things that we look at when we're actually diagnosing these problems too. And then of course the fuel system, how the fuel get from the gas tank, wherever the gas tank might be. Sometimes they're back by the trunk, sometimes you're actually, the passengers are actually sitting on it. There's different placements of the gas tank. And then we draw it in, we go through a fuel injection system. So we got the tank, the lines, the injectors, and then all this is part of electronic fuel pumps that are involved in, and then we have electronic fuel injection too. And we'll get more into that as we go along. And then a starting and the charging system. I'm going to really go lightly over this. We have a whole section on the electrical and stuff like that in one of our classes too. So then we have the ignition system where it makes all the magic happen with the spark. Remember, this is a spark ignition type system, and we'll talk more about how the compression ignition systems works too as we go along. And then because of a lot of the regulations, of course, and two, it does help make the air breathable. And with new things happening, and now that we're finally getting money in to fight some of the global warming, which is a big problem right now in a lot of cities and states and countries, we have had record heat waves, forest fires, and it's just going to keep on climbing unless we do something about it immediately. I won't get on to that, but you know kind of how I feel about it. Anyway, the emission systems actually help eliminate a lot of the byproducts of combustion at the tailpipe. So we have things like catalytic converters, we have pre-combustion controls, and we have post-combustion controls. And I'll touch a little bit about that as we go along too. And then we have different configurations of how the power is transmitted. Is it transmitted to the rear wheels or transferred to the front wheels? And we can actually have both of them being the power transmitted to it. And what I mean by that is, you'll have the engine up front of the car, majority of the times. Now, there is some of the Porsches and also early VWs had rear engine drives. In other words, the engine was in the back, and the wheels are driven from the back too. Subaru has, and other manufacturers has what they call four-wheel. Well, it is four-wheel drive, so it'll drive the front wheels and the rear wheels, and we'll get more into that as we go along too. So in the basic terms, you have like trucks in some of the earlier cars had rear-wheel drive. So the engine would be up front, but the rear wheels were what powered the vehicles that got it going down the street, and the front wheels were more for steering control. Now there is also what they call front wheel drive, where we have a transverse motor. Again, we'll get more into how the engine plays a part in the automobile too. But now we have an engine that actually drives the front wheels through its transaxle system. And then of course, like I said before, there's what they call four-wheel drive. This is where it powers all the wheels. It's really great for I would say more so in the mountains, anytime that you need all three wheels helping pull the vehicle. And when you get into weather conditions, that's a lot, more convenient to have all wheels going versus just the back two or the front two. And now you have all four wheels going in like that. So it's just how the manufacturer plays it out. Now, also, we have the electrical and electronic systems that we like to talk about, which we'll be covering a little bit about too. And this, actually, covers a lot of the electrical and the electronics, like your tire monitoring systems, your heated and cooled seats. You get those little comfort things going on. Automatic climate control with your air conditioning or your heating going on. And then your power windows. How does it know that to lock the doors when you just drive down the street? It's part of the electronics going on inside. And your security systems and your electronic power steering. And instead of being a pump-driven power steering, we have electric steering now. And I'll talk more about why as we go along. And then your electronic suspensions. Does your car have the ability to go into sport mode? Where it actually gives more of an aggressive steering suspension system and steering going on. So this is all under the electrical and electronics part of the vehicle itself. And then what I wanted to kind of follow up on all of this is there is a nationally recognized, actually worldwide recognized, institution that does testing of technicians. It's totally voluntary. You don't have to go in there. They don't force you into going in and taking these tests. I actually happen to hold several of the tests on different levels in the automotive and the medium heavy duty truck, and also on the bus section, which is what they consider transit section. So I hold currently a master in all three sections, and I have some other upper level. One of the reasons why is because I have a smog license, and the smog program recognizes this training and this certification process to actually actually hold a smog license, the inspection and repair. And then also I actually teach the program too, so I have to even have a bigger standard of my actual certifications like that too. So anyways, I wanted to kind of end this off because it's just like an overview of the automotive industry, give you a little bit of background on it. I know I could go a lot longer. I could tell you a lot of stories that I've actually, that's happened to me in the automotive industry. It's always put food on the table. The automotive industry is just going to continue to grow. There's been studies done, and I believe it was by 2035 by the study. I'll have to pull it out. But we will have a deficit of about 250,000 technicians. So the automotive industry is always looking for technicians. We have a great relationships with a lot of dealerships and independent shops. And I actually have a meeting that's come Thursday, one of the transmission shops wants to have a actual, you know, kind of a relationship to have our students work for the transmission shop. And this is not something small. They actually have transmission shops everywhere. And also, we have in relationships with a lot of the dealerships, like I said before. So whatever your cup of tea is probably where we can actually get you employed. So stay tuned. We'll be talking more. I appreciate your time, and I hopefully this is helpful. But please make sure you do your reading, and I will talk to you soon. Take care now. Bye for now.